In 1985, a single Hollywood megastar walked away from the jungle with $15 million, while the supporting soldiers bleeding beside him barely scraped together minimum union wages. How does a blockbuster generating hundreds of millions leave behind a brutal trail of forgotten faces and vastly unequal fortunes? Who conquered the ruthless entertainment machine and who was ultimately swallowed whole by the very system? They helped enrich the jungle rot has long faded, but the scorched reality of 2026 finally exposes the absolute truth. Number 1. Sylvester Stallone. $1,200,000. $15,000. At 38 years old, Sylvester Stallone, born in Hell's Kitchen, New York, to an astrologer, mother, and a beautician father, stepped back into the dense, suffocating jungle. He perfectly embodied John Rambo, the deeply traumatized Green Beret, transformed into an unstoppable one-man army sent back to Vietnam to uncover missing prisoners of war. Having completely authored his own meteoric rise from a struggling, impoverished actor to a dual-franchise Hollywood titan, his negotiating power was absolute. Recognizing his undisputed status as a global box office deity, the studio granted him an unprecedented ironclad contract. Combining a massive heavyweight upfront salary with a highly lucrative back-end percentage of the film's staggering $300 million global gross, he secured an astronomical total payout, officially estimated between $12 and $15 million. Today, in the relentless reality of 2026, the almost 80-year-old action pioneer remains vibrantly alive, sitting atop a colossal multi-hundred-million-dollar cinematic empire. Never allowing himself to be chewed up and discarded by the fickle Hollywood machine, Stallone constantly reinvented his legacy, anchoring violent nostalgia franchises and earning modern Academy Award recognition for reprising his classic, beaten-down characters. Refusing to surrender to age, he actively dominates both prestige streaming television and global cinematic universes entirely on his own uncompromising terms. The modern public does not view him merely as a faded relic of explosive 80s cinema. They fiercely revere him as an unkillable industry titan, a brilliant writer, and an unstoppable force of nature who permanently conquered the Hollywood pantheon. Number 2. Richard Crenna. 500,000 USD. 750,000 USD. Standing directly behind the unstoppable army was the only authority figure capable of holding his psychological leash. At 58, Richard Crenna, born in Los Angeles to a hotel manager, mother, and a pharmacist father, returned to the explosive franchise. He flawlessly embodied Colonel Samuel Trotman, the hardened commanding officer and surrogate father who initially forged the ultimate weapon, bringing immense gravitas to a film heavily dominated by sheer physical carnage. His seasoned presence deeply anchored the underlying tragedy of the forgotten soldiers. Because he was a highly respected veteran actor returning to an iconic foundational role, the studio immediately bypassed standard minimums to negotiate a substantial flat upfront fee. To secure his authoritative gravelly voice for the brutal sequel, the production handed him a highly lucrative salary, officially estimated between $500,000 and $750,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the cinematic world has long mourned the profound loss of this dignified industry veteran. Crenna tragically passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2003 at 76 decades before the modern era of endless franchise reboots. However, his highly secure fortune and deeply respected legacy remain absolutely bulletproof. He never experienced a brutal Hollywood downfall, working steadily in acclaimed television dramas and sharp comedic parodies until his final days. Today, the modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten secondary military suit. They fiercely revere him as the immortal, definitive voice of reason. Within 80s action cinema, an untouchable titan who permanently elevated a bloody blockbuster into legendary history. Number 3. Charles Napier. $150,000. $250,000. Betraying the very soldiers Troutman sought to protect, a towering, square-jawed veteran stepped into the treacherous bureaucratic shadows. At 49, Charles Napier, born in rural Kentucky to a hard-working tobacco farmer, brought calculated malice to the steaming jungle. He flawlessly embodied Marshall Murdoch, the deceitful CIA operative, manipulating the traumatic rescue mission entirely for political optics. Injecting deeply infuriating corporate evil into a landscape of visceral, physical warfare, his antagonistic role was absolutely vital to the narrative. Operating as a highly established, reliable character actor, managing significant screen time, his representatives negotiated a robust standard upfront salary. To secure his infuriatingly slick, commanding presence, the studio compensated him with a flat fee officially estimated between $150,000 and $250,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the entertainment industry has long mourned the loss of this instantly recognizable icon. Napier passed away in 2011 at 75, leaving behind an incredibly prolific, ironclad cinematic legacy. Never falling into devastating Hollywood obscurity, he successfully leveraged his imposing frame and booming voice to secure hundreds of diverse roles across massive blockbusters and acclaimed animated series. He fully embraced his status as the ultimate, dependable working actor, completely rejecting the toxic allure of A-list vanity. The modern public does not view him merely as a cowardly, forgotten 80s bureaucrat trembling in a shattered office. They fiercely revere him as a masterclass character actor, an immortal titan who manipulated a mid-tier paycheck into a permanent, unshakable Hollywood footprint. Number 4, Steven Berkoff, $100. $150. Operating far above Murdoch's cowardly bureaucracy was the true sadistic architect of the torture. At 47, Steven Berkoff, born in London to a hard-working tailor, brought chilling theatrical menace across the Atlantic. He flawlessly embodied Lieutenant Colonel Podolsky, the ruthless Soviet interrogator who pushed the captive protagonist to his absolute limits, bringing prestige classical British stage training to a villain. Because he was an established international talent explicitly imported to anchor the primary villainous threat, his representatives negotiated a premium flat upfront fee. To secure his terrifying, sneering intensity, the studio handed him a lucrative salary officially estimated between $100,000 and $150,000. In the reality of 2026, the 88-year-old British powerhouse remains vibrantly alive, standing as an untouchable pillar of international theater and cinema. Completely insulated by a highly secure fortune, Berkoff never allowed himself to be trapped by his legendary run of iconic 80s Hollywood villains. Instead, he fiercely guarded his artistic integrity, continuously returning to his roots to write, direct, and star in avant-garde, critically acclaimed stage productions worldwide. He completely rejected the shallow vanity of the California studio system. Today, the modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten explosive casualty of a helicopter chase. They fiercely revere him as a brilliant, multifaceted theatrical genius who conquered both highbrow stagecraft and billion-dollar popcorn blockbusters, entirely on his own uncompromising terms. Number 5, Julia Nickson, $50. $75. Stepping into the brutal crossfire was a stunning newcomer carrying the tragic emotional soul of the explosive blockbuster. At 26, Julia Nickson, born in Singapore to an English father and a Chinese mother, made her massive feature film debut in the steaming jungle. She flawlessly embodied Kove, the courageous local freedom fighter, and the protagonist's deeply tragic love interest whose devastating on-screen death violently shatters Rambo's remaining humanity. Tasked with injecting pure, heartbreaking vulnerability into an otherwise relentlessly violent narrative, her performance was absolutely vital. Because she was a completely unknown actress attempting to break into a fiercely competitive industry, the studio strictly adhered to standard newcomer rates for a supporting role. To secure her crucial emotional anchor, the production handed her a modest, upfront salary, officially estimated between $50,000 and $75,000. In the complex reality of 2026, the 67-year-old actress remains vibrantly alive, living peacefully, far from the grinding, relentless machinery of Hollywood. Never completely consumed by the massive blockbuster spotlight that initially launched her career, Nickson steadily worked across decades in acclaimed television, before deliberately stepping back to embrace a deeply private, spiritually grounded life, refusing to be trapped as a tragic 80s casualty. She secured her own comfortable independence, completely rejecting the toxic desperation of fame. Today, the modern public does not view her merely as a forgotten, underpaid on-screen sacrifice. They fiercely revere her as a resilient, trailblazing talent who shattered massive industry barriers for Asian actresses, brilliantly manipulating a modest newcomer paycheck into permanent cinematic immortality. Number 6, Martin Kove, $40, $60. At 39, Martin Kove, born in Brooklyn, New York, stepped into the treacherous mercenary ranks of the steaming jungle. He flawlessly embodied Erickson, the deceitful, cynical helicopter pilot who brutally abandons the protagonist to the enemy under Murdoch's cowardly orders. Bringing crucial, arrogant menace to the extraction team, his value was significantly amplified by his recent pop culture footprint. Having just dominated the cinematic landscape as a terrifying martial arts sensei in the blockbuster The Karate Kid the previous year, his agents heavily leveraged his scorching momentum. To secure his recognizable villainy over standard background mercenaries, the studio bypassed absolute baseline minimums, handing him a respectable upfront salary, officially estimated between $40,000 and $60,000. In the spectacular reality of 2026, the 80-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, dominating the industry through one of the most phenomenal career resurrections in modern television history. Fully insulated by a secure multi-million-dollar fortune, Kove completely shattered the tragic obscurity that swallowed many 80s action stars. He brilliantly returned to his most iconic martial arts role, capturing an entirely new, massive global audience by anchoring a powerhouse streaming franchise. Refusing to quietly surrender to age, he continuously commands immense respect across the worldwide convention circuit. The modern public does not view him merely as a cowardly forgotten pilot left behind in the mud. They fiercely revere him as an unyielding, immortal pop culture titan who conquered the modern entertainment landscape entirely on his own uncompromising terms. Number 7, George Cheung, $25, $35. At 36, George Cheung, born in Hong Kong before migrating to the United States to forge a formidable career, stepped into the hostile encampment. He flawlessly embodied Captain Tay, the ruthless Vietnamese commanding officer, executing brutal Soviet directives to break the captive protagonist. Bringing terrifying stoic authority to the enemy stronghold, his menacing presence was absolutely critical to establishing the grueling stakes of the torture sequences. Operating as a dependable character actor within the sprawling blockbuster machine, his financial compensation was strictly dictated by Screen Actors Guild guidelines. Paid systematically on a weekly rate for his days enduring the dense, suffocating jungle sets, he received zero back-end box office percentages. To secure his essential, intimidating on-screen presence, the studio handed him a modest upfront salary, officially estimated between $25,000 and $35,000. In the reality of 2026, the 77-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, living securely far beyond the explosive shadows of 80s cinema. Never vanishing into the unforgiving Hollywood void, Cheung deliberately built an incredibly resilient, decades-long career as a highly sought-after character actor and stunt performer. He successfully navigated a notoriously difficult industry, consistently securing television roles while passionately pursuing live musical performances. He completely rejected the brutal attrition rate of the studio system. The modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten military casualty obliterated by an explosive arrow. They fiercely revere him as a tireless, barrier-breaking Asian American pioneer who brilliantly manipulated a modest union paycheck into a permanent, ironclad Hollywood legacy. Number 8, Vojo Goric, 15 USD, 20 USD. At 45, Vojo Goric, born Vojislav Govedarica in Serbia, before aggressively migrating to the United States, stepped into the suffocating jungle. He flawlessly embodied Sergeant Yushin, the towering, physically terrifying Soviet enforcer, brutally executing Podolsky's sadistic torture orders. Operating as the ultimate physical wall designed to break the unstoppable protagonist, his hulking on-screen presence was absolutely essential to the visceral impact of the prison camp. Because he was cast as a massive, intimidating adversary rather than a heavily dialogue-driven character, his compensation was strictly dictated by standard union guidelines. Paid systematically for his actual weeks of punishing physical labor on the chaotic set, the studio handed him a highly modest upfront salary, officially estimated between $15,000 and $20,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the cinematic world has officially bid farewell to this towering industry veteran. Goric passed away in late 2023 at 83, leaving behind a completely ironclad footprint in classic action cinema. He never desperately chased elusive leading man vanity. Instead, he intelligently leveraged his massive physique to secure decades of consistent, reliable work across beloved action cult classics, including memorable appearances in Lionheart. He completely rejected the devastating pitfalls of Hollywood obscurity. The modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten silent henchman swallowed by the jungle. They fiercely revere him as a definitive, formidable cinematic giant who brilliantly manipulated a modest union paycheck into permanent, unbreakable 80s action immortality. The unforgiving jungle of Hollywood has swallowed countless stars, but the empire built by this cast remains unbroken. Whether their real-world journeys end devastating silence or untouchable billionaire dominance, the visceral cinematic history they forged in blood and mud is utterly immortal. The brutal entertainment machine will always keep its darkest financial secrets hidden in the shadows. Do not let the next untold story pass you by. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications and join our investigation before the absolute truth is buried forever.